Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today. Our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera is going to be leading a conversation with founder of MigrantInsider.com, Mr. Pablo Manríquez. That's going to be coming up in just a few moments. But as always, let's go ahead and start with taking a look at what's making headlines across the border, starting with a story out of Los Angeles, where federal officers shot a man in the elbow and a deputy U.S. Marshal was hit in the hand with a ricochet bullet during an ICE raid that took place in South L.A. Tuesday morning. Homeland Security says officers were attempting to arrest a man from Mexico who entered the country illegally. A department spokesperson says the man rammed officers' cars with his vehicle and tried to escape after he was pulled over during a traffic stop. At least one ICE officer opened fire, hitting the man. A federal agent was also hit in the hand with a ricochet from that bullet. The incident created tensions in the area as residents protested the immigration enforcement operations happening near their homes. Moving on, President Donald Trump is threatening to send National Guard troops to San Francisco now. He calls the city crime-ridden and claims residents want federal help. Local leaders disagree, noting that crime in their city is down. Mayor Danielle Lurie says the city is safe and doesn't need troops. Trump is citing crime as his reason, but San Francisco hasn't seen the same federal immigration enforcement as other cities. Local officials and residents oppose the idea, fearing chaos and unrest. Governor Gavin Newsom's administration vows to fight in court any deployment to any city in the state. San Francisco continues to recover from the pandemic, showing signs of improvement. And in New York, an immigration enforcement operation that sparked spontaneous protest on Manhattan's Canal Street led to the arrest of 14 people, according to federal authorities. The arrest included several demonstrators that are being accused of assaulting or obstructing agents. ICE agents swarmed Canal Street on Tuesday to crack down on street vendors selling counterfeit goods. Law enforcement raids aimed at combating counterfeiting are relatively frequent on Canal Street, but the sight of dozens of masked immigration and custom enforcement agents and other federal agents making arrests drew instant protesting. Bystanders and protesters confronted the agents and tried to block the immigration sweeps targeting vendors, many of them of West African descent. The protests forced the agents to retreat and regroup near their offices at the nearby federal building. Protesters surrounded the masked officers and attempted to block their vehicle from driving off while shouting, quote, "ICE out of New York," end quote. In a statement, DHS said rioters were shouting obscenities, became violent, and obstructed law enforcement duties, including blocking vehicles and assaulting law enforcement. DHS said the immigrants had previous charges of robbery, domestic violence, and forgery, among other crimes. Time to bring in our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, and our guest for today, Mr. Pablo Manríquez, founder of MigrantInsider.com. How you doing, gentlemen?
We're doing well.
Good to see you, Rudy.
Well, I see the story out of Canal Street in New York. Where are we going to get our fake Louis Vuitton bags and fake Rolex watches from now on? It's almost like a tourist stop in New York. So they're, in a way, they're hurting tourism to that city. But without further ado, I want to introduce Pablo Manríquez, who is the man behind Migrant Insider. Pablo, tell us about the publication. I know you've been around for about a year now. How did you get started? Tell us about yourself and what you cover. What are you looking for when you do go out and try to get a story?
So I guess to start with, Migrant Insider is the immigration publication for here in Washington, D.C. For years and years, I have covered Congress mostly for Latino, starting with Latino rebels. Then I was New Republic correspondent here. Then I was Vanity Fair's correspondent on Capitol Hill. And, I just saw that there wasn't a whole lot of immigrant input into the Washington press corps. So I was like, I have the access, I have the connections, and I have the relationships. I just need the outlet where I can edit and publish the stories that I know are important to the immigrant communities that have always been good to me, the immigrant communities that I'm from. And that's kind of how it got started. That was the genesis behind it. We're just, we're access journalists. I know that doesn't have always the best connotation to it, but I feel like, our colleagues are doing incredible work right now at like the Chicago Tribune, at the City of New York, at Border Report, finding the stories on the ground that are out in the country But here in Washington, in the hallways of power, where we're at right here, where I'm talking from right now, there was never really any emphasis on an enduring daily immigration beat. And that's what we've become. We've become the immigration beat. I like to say that sometimes we're like the Politico Pro of immigration. You think about it, a lot of these outlets here in Washington that are very famous, I'm not going to name them right now because it will be rude, but they don't even have an immigration reporter, right? And at the beginning of the Trump administration, I've been paying really close attention to ICE since back when I first got to Washington. I came to Washington for the first time during Obama's first inauguration. So I've been here pretty much ever since. And the immigration beat has always been underserved. So we found this market vacuum and filled it with, interviews with Congress people, interviews with the White House. We've asked questions to President Trump. We've asked questions to Mike Johnson, John Thune, Hakeem Jeffries, pretty much everybody who's in charge, Chuck Schumer. And we've, been able to find two real strengths in our reporting at this point have been what I call the paper chase. We always want the bill, if it's an immigration bill, whether you're a Democrat or you're Republican, we want the immigration bill and we want it first. We want the full text. We don't just want a summary of it. We want the full text. We want to know exactly what's in it. And that's served us really well, kind of put us on the map, covering the Lake and Riley Act back in March, covering the Big Beautiful Bill Act back in July. We knew very intimately like how it was coming together and what was in it, which made us kind of unique. It gave us kind of a market advantage. And the other thing is lately, and this is more something that's happened in the last couple of months, we started leveraging video. So Instagram in particular, Migrant Insider on Instagram, we put a word out to Chicago after the ICE and other immigration officials started coming and committing acts of misconduct and bullying and brutalizing people here in Washington, D.C. I made a video and I said, hey, Chicago, it looks like you're about to be going through what we've been going through. So if you see anything, if you see any videos out on the streets or whatever, feel free to share it with us. I also told them, Laura Rodriguez at the Chicago Tribune, Jake Sheridan at the Chicago Tribune, also great local reporters. We're not trying to have a monopoly on the beat. If anything, we want everybody to be as good at the immigration beat, as good at covering the immigration beat as we are. But we acknowledge at this point that we are the best in what we do because we're the only thing in what we do. We have a monopoly on the daily immigration beat in Washington. We're also just, a superlative, the first ever in the history of the Washington Press Corps immigration news boutique, which is crazy to me. It's such an important topic. It's such an important topic for millions of people around the country and has been for decades. And yet there's never been a newsroom dedicated specifically to immigration in this town. That's us. So we're the first, we're the only, which makes us the best. And yeah, the videos started coming in. And once the videos started coming in, our Instagram just blew up. We're doing about between 20 and 30 million views a month on Instagram just from our video content. So we went chasing the PDFs and documents to informing our readers and breaking news on that. Just and a lot of court cases exclusive to now being more, in addition, adding like a video outlet component. And we've just grown. I mean, there was obviously a need for it. We saw this coming from a mile away. I was born under Pinochet, so I'm not surprised at all by the way the Trump administration has been comporting itself. They basically said what they were going to do, and they've done it. And it's horrible what they're doing. The misconduct everywhere. But having been born under Pinochet and informed by, that, it's like that this is a moment, and anyone disagrees or argues with it at this point that we have.
Wow,
I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
You're comparing Pinochet to Trump. That's a lot, man. But I did want to ask you, you mentioned access. You're in Congress, you have access to the White House, and you do more than just get news releases and rewrite them and put them out. Talk about the topics, the information that you are going after, because a lot of times, and I must say, you get stuff, material, stories that we don't. How is that?
Well, I mean, when you're an inside journalist, basically an access journalist plays the access game. So the most important thing is having direct access to the principals. We don't typically talk to staffers. Like I might talk to one or two staffers a week at the White House, the agencies, whatever. But the people we do talk to are the principals. So like I just about 30 minutes ago asked Hakeem Jeffries if he thinks ICE should get the Doge treatment, given what happened yesterday on Canal Street in New York City. So talking directly to Hakeem Jeffries means I don't have to go through his press secretary. I don't have to go through his communications director or whatever. And when you're having that one-to-one relationship, that means that there's no filter. He had no idea what question I was going to ask him. I asked him, he dodged, he didn't really answer it. But Nevertheless, though, that was the game. So the game is like, if we're going to talk to people, we're either going to talk to people who are impacted by these policies, who are making these policies. We avoid the middlemen. So the only time we ever want to deal with the middlemen is if they have a document exclusive to us that we can break. So if you have a letter, if you have a bill text, if you have a memo, if you have some text messages or something like that you want to share with us, then we will talk to you, the staffer. But we're not about to we don't play gatekeeper games because we don't have to. We will find your boss in the hallway of our Capitol complex if one way or another. So reaching out to them, it's always been, I learned early on in my time covering Congress that staffers, they want to insert themselves. That's their job. I actually used to be a press secretary, so I sympathize with their position. But having been a press secretary before, having put together 1 million press conferences and having staffed bosses around town and stuff like that, I knew better than to deal with them because, that puts them between a rock and a hard place. I am the rock, and politics is this hard place that we cover. So politics and policy. So that's how we get it. Basically, we'll do a lot of off the record. We'll talk to people off the record. And then the other big source of exclusive information that we get is from the community. So if we can link with our reporting, Donald Trump specifically, I got a question directly to Donald Trump with, say, an Afghan war ally who's stuck in some holding center in Qatar, right? Who helped our people over there when we were at war. So I've spoken with the Afghani. He's telling me he's suffering. He's telling me these are the promises that were made to him. He's showing me his letters of recommendation from the various soldiers that he helped save their lives and stuff like that in Afghanistan. Well, I'm asking Trump about it, or I'm asking the Foreign Relations Committee chair or, the State Department, like Marco Rubio specifically, the Secretary of State. I've been in this town 15 years. I know what they're going to be. I know what the parameters of the press are. I know what type of attitude or what type of tone you need to take with your questions. And I've always abided with the decorum the decorum and sort of the essential collegiality of the press corps. But I also recognize that my questions would never have been asked without me, and that they hadn't been asked without me. So they need to take priority. And sometimes that just means being really aggressive. And that's, we're bulldogs, we're pit bulls on this beat, if that makes sense.
We're speaking with Pablo Manríquez from MigrantInsider.com about the work they do and what they cover, which is just exactly the topic that we're covering here on Border Report Live. So we're going to continue the conversation after a quick break. We'll be back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles. Salvador Rivera joining us here from San Diego, and our guest for today, Pablo Manríquez, founder of MigrantInsider.com.
Well, Pablo, you have mentioned ICE and the staggering amount of money that this agency is now controlling. Talk a little bit about how big this agency is when you compare it to other federal law enforcement agencies and even the U.S. Marine Corps.
Yeah, so ICE got through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, $160 billion between now and 2030 to spend on deportations. But the key thing about, in as much as it relates to what you're seeing on the streets right now, what you're seeing on social media, is that Kristi Noem got a $45 billion spending credit the moment the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was signed on July 4th. So $45 billion, just for context, is a staggering amount of money for a cabinet secretary, for any Department of Defense cabinet secretary. And Kristi Noem, for context, was a total lightweight in Congress. She served here for a few years. She didn't really do much. And then she went to a state with a tiny population to be governor. And again, she didn't really do much. And so for her to have this incredible responsibility, being like a policy lightweight, an administrative lightweight, means that, obviously it was going to be a total disaster, and it has been a total disaster. Now, she seems to prioritize more than anything her own look, like the optics of it. But the funny thing is, as much effort and stuff as she's putting into the optics of ICE through these memes and videos and cosplay costumes and stuff like that she and her officials are doing, ICE is quickly becoming the most hated federal agency in America. I think it's the only federal agency in America right now that polling would indicate is more hated than ICE is the IRS. So, and that just goes to show you that they're failing at this. They're failing at every possible way that you could spend $45 billion. She just spent $247 million on private jets. She's got, again, just to put this in the context, she's got $45 billion. She can't seem to get her agents uniforms, holsters for their weapons. The agents are not going through proper training, right? Nothing about the administration of this money, the taxpayer money, a generational investment into atrocity, is being administered in a way that makes any sense at all. She's not hitting her numbers that the Trump administration would like her to hit. If you're a MAGA listening, then she's not doing a good job for you either. If you want to deport everybody, she's not doing it. She's not going to be able to do it. Now, if you're a more reasonable person with a good heart and a patriotic heart, and you actually love immigrants and acknowledge the good and the essentiality of immigrants to the American economy, to American culture and everything else, then this was just a terrible investment. That whole bill was just a terrible bill. It was just completely unpopular. There was nothing in it that was popular. But like so many things in Washington, it was passed in the dead of night, like through an amendments process, through several overnight sessions. Some of them were weekend sessions, and then dropped on the president's desk with brilliant branding. That's something that the Trump administration has always done really well, is branding, right? But even ICE has not been able to be, effectively branded for broad swaths of the American people. There was this notion during the campaign that they were going to deport dangerous people. Okay, who doesn't disagree with that? Of course, you want to deport pedophiles. Of course, you want to deport rapists after they, serve their time or whatever. But that's not who they're going after, and everybody knows it now. Like, you'd have to be a pretty hardcore idiot and not paying attention at all to think to yourself, wow, this is, the tamales lady on the corner was an MS-13 member. That's garbage, and everybody knows it. And the popularity of these policies is declining. And the biggest question on the immigration beat right now is this, right? The president, any president, lives in a bubble. Access to the president, direct access to the president, is very tightly controlled. The big question now is Trump aware that Stephen Miller's immigration policies are making him chronically unpopular with that key middle swath of moderate America, right? That is completely unimpressed and in many cases appalled with what they're seeing ICE do on the streets. And we don't know. That's a question that we just don't know yet. Sure. Their talking points would indicate that he's not aware. Their talking points would indicate that he's being told that this is really popular and it's going really well. It's not going really well. It's incredibly unpopular. And nobody is satisfied with what's going on. Whether you're a MAGA or whether you're a progressive, whether you're on the streets for a No Kings rally, nobody is impressed with ICE right now, despite this enormous amount of money that Kristi Noem has to spend on it.
Well, if you walk through an airport, you're not going to be able to avoid seeing Kristi Noem on a monitor somewhere. Let's talk about ICE agents. And this is something that we discussed recently ourselves, that there's a big movement to prosecute ICE agents who are not following the law, who are taking people off the street without a warrant or a court order. Talk about what you're finding out on this issue.
Well, it's really interesting. So obviously the president has pardon power. So a lot of people are very concerned that if they were to prosecute an ICE agent for misconduct, that they would just be pardoned by the president. And then, if there were prosecutions ongoing toward the end of his presidency, when pardons typically happen, although this president's a little different, that there will be a mass pardon of ICE agents who committed misconduct, atrocities, and so on during the mass deportations. So what basically that leaves is state level prosecutions, which my understanding is are not germane to a presidential pardon, and prosecutions after the presidency. Now, a lot of people have been hitting a lot of roadblocks with how evidence is being compiled. Apple and Google just removed an app that existed specifically to compile evidence of ICE abuse. They just removed it from the App Store with no real applicable reason. But there are groups of attorneys, there are community organizers, there are people on social media, and I don't think that it's become like an organized database yet of misconduct, of evidence, But I think that seems to be, my instinct is that seems to be sort of the direction it's headed, as a ready-made database of like which agents were where, doing what misconduct, agents pointing guns in the face of pregnant women, for example, like what happened yesterday in Berwyn, Illinois. I'm sorry, what happened Tuesday in Berwyn, Illinois. There are just a million different instances of it. The question is, what is the timing of these prosecutions? I think that Democrats learned their lesson under Merrick Garland, who was Joe Biden's attorney general, who slow-walked his investigations into the Trump's first term. And they slow-walked it so much that they just kind of, like the MAGA movement just kind of ran out the clock on the public accountability of the abuses of that term. My impression is that a new generation of, especially in Congress, are people calling for a much more aggressive approach. If Democrats were to return to power in 2028. The other big opportunity, and this isn't necessarily a prosecution opportunity, but another big opportunity is through the subpoena power should Democrats take either chamber of Congress in the new term. You got to remember that the House of Representatives in particular has the power to send the sergeant at arms and handcuff somebody and compel them to come and testify. So if you are held in contempt of Congress, it doesn't get used very often, but if Stephen Miller, for example, who never testifies before Congress, were to be held in contempt of Congress, the House of Representatives, if it were a Democratic-led majority, would have the power, if they wanted to send law enforcement, put him in handcuffs and drag him before a committee. That is something that has happened in American history, hasn't happened for a long time, but it is there. These are the whispers we're hearing here on Capitol Hill of what the options are should Democrats gain a majority in the House. In the Senate, same deal. You got subpoena power. If the Senate Appropriations Committee and the various appropriators are led by Democrats, you could see, anything from rescissions of ICE funding to, massive subpoena power, a reduction of defunding of ICE, like using ICE as a leverage point to ICE funding specifically as a leverage point in negotiations about other things, whether it's the National Defense Authorization Act or, the various appropriations bills. So ICE is having a moment right now, and they're blowing it, in my opinion. They're blowing it in terms of public opinion. They're blowing it in terms of like the effectiveness of what they promised to do, which was make America safer. They aren't. They're making America less safe, and they're raising the temperature of a political moment that's already becoming very toxic and very dangerous. So should Democrats take power, the question is, this is what Democrats typically do, to be perfectly frank. Democrats like to say, we hate ICE, we hate immigration, we're totally against these abuses when they're not in power. And then as soon as they're in power, ignore everything that happened before and try and pass healthcare policy, focus completely on healthcare policy. So it's really a question of are the American people going to demand accountability once it's no longer as viscerally as viscerally present in their lives as it is now. And if history is any precedent, they aren't. If history is any precedent, then ICE is going to get away with everything they're doing. So it's kind of it's on the American people to have the evidence ready to go the moment power changes hands and demand public accountability from Congress and state houses and state legislatures and state courthouses and stuff like that, like Governor Pritzker is doing in Illinois, while this is going on, and then see it through.
We've been speaking
vindictively.
I'm sorry, Rudy, but Pablo, not to contradict you, but I don't know about the subpoena powers working, and we'll learn about accountability on the part of the American public in November. We'll see what happens in the election coming up about a year from now. Rudy, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. This is one of those conversations that I wish this program was an hour long, because I feel like we could talk for a few hours, but we just wanted to thank you, Mr. Manríquez. We've been speaking with Pablo Manríquez, founder of MigrantInsider.com, about the work they do, and also getting a little analysis on the contemporary issues when it comes to immigration under the Trump administration. So thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we can have you back again soon, sir.
Thank you, sirs.
All right. Stay with us. Border Report Live will be back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. Got one more headline to tell you about, and this one's actually out of Florida. A Florida lawmaker has proposed a bill that would make victims of, quote, illegal migrant crime or their loved ones eligible for financial compensation. It would impose a $10,000 fine on any law enforcement agency that fails to enforce and comply with current state immigration law, which requires that law enforcement agencies collaborate with federal immigration enforcement officers. The bill goes on to say that any fines collected would be used to compensate those who were victims of crimes committed by suspects that are in the country illegally. Really quick, before we go, if you missed our conversation with Pablo Manríquez, founder of MigrantInsider.com, again, one of those ones that you wish this program was an hour, 2 hours long even, because I felt like we could have continued for quite a long time with all the knowledge he has up there from Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. But remember, you can always catch up with what we're doing in podcast form. because Border Report Live is now available on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, YouTube, and Spotify. You can see those apps down there at the bottom of your screen. So don't forget to go on there, like, subscribe, and take a listen. If you missed a previous episode, scroll through, and definitely give us a rating. Good or bad, we want to know what you think because we are always trying to improve here on Border Report Live. That is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here, whether it be live or wherever you're watching from across the country or across the globe. We appreciate you so much. For Salvador Rivera in San Diego, my name is Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen, Texas. Until tomorrow, have a great day.